My name is David Martinez, and for 32 years, I lived the kind of quiet life that most people dream about. I owned a small electrical contracting business in Cedar Falls, a town where everybody knew everybody, and the biggest excitement was usually the annual corn festival. My days started at 5 in the morning with coffee and ended around sunset, working on power lines, generator installations, and emergency electrical repairs throughout our county. The center of my world was my father, Miguel. At 78, he had survived 2 heart attacks and severe emphysema that left him dependent on an oxygen concentrator, a BiPAP machine for sleep, and a heart monitor that transmitted data to his cardiologist twice daily. Our modest 2-story home had been converted into what looked like a small medical facility. Tubes, wires, and monitors filled the living room where Dad spent most of his time in his hospital bed. Every morning, I checked his oxygen levels, refilled his medication dispensers, and made sure all his equipment was functioning properly. The machines hummed constantly, a sound that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. Dad never complained, though I could see the frustration in his eyes when he struggled to catch his breath, or when the heart monitor beeped warnings about irregular rhythms. "You do too much for me, David," he would say in his raspy voice. "You should have a family of your own." But Dad was my family. After Mom passed 5 years earlier, it became just the two of us against the world. I had never married, never had children, and honestly, I preferred it that way. Taking care of him gave my life purpose and meaning that I had never found anywhere else. Our neighborhood was peaceful, filled with older folks and young families who looked out for each other. Mrs. Chen next door brought us homemade soup twice a week. The Johnson family across the street always offered to help with yard work. It was the kind of community where people still waved when they drove past, and where children could play outside without parents worrying. The only thing that had changed in recent months was the increased police presence. Sheriff Karen Walsh had been elected 2 years earlier on a platform of bringing order and respect back to Cedar Falls. She was a tall, stern-faced woman in her 40s who seemed to take personal offense at anything that disrupted her vision of how the town should operate. I had seen her patrol car in our neighborhood more frequently, and I had heard whispers from neighbors about unexpected visits and citations for minor infractions. Mrs. Chen had received a warning for parking slightly over the property line. The Johnsons got a citation for their dog barking during the day. Nothing too serious, but it created an atmosphere of unease that had never existed before. On the morning everything changed, I was testing a backup generator in my garage, the same routine I performed monthly to ensure it would work if the power ever went out. Dad's medical equipment required constant electricity, and even a brief outage could be life-threatening. The generator ran smoothly for 20 minutes before I shut it down and recorded the test in my maintenance log. I had no idea that Sheriff Karen had been watching from across the street, or that she had already decided I was going to be her next target. The knock on my door came at 2:30 that afternoon, sharp and demanding. Through the window, I saw Sheriff Karen standing on my porch with 2 deputies flanking her like bodyguards. My stomach dropped immediately. In a small town, when the sheriff shows up at your door with backup, it usually means serious trouble. I opened the door and tried to keep my voice steady. "Good afternoon, Sheriff. How can I help you?" Karen did not return my greeting. Her cold blue eyes scanned past me into the house, taking inventory of everything she could see. We received multiple noise complaints about excessive generator testing at this address. Mind if we come in and take a look around? The question felt more like a command than a request. I stepped aside, and the 3 officers entered my home. I could hear Dad's oxygen concentrator working in the living room, along with the steady beep of his heart monitor. The sound seemed to irritate Corinne immediately. "What is all this medical equipment?" she asked, walking directly toward Dad's bed without being invited. "My father requires life support machines," I explained, following her into the living room. "He has severe heart and lung conditions." Dad looked up at the officers with confusion and fear in his eyes. He had always been intimidated by authority figures, a holdover from his childhood in Mexico, where police were often corrupt and dangerous. Corinne examined the medical equipment with obvious disapproval. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a hospital. Do you have permits for all this electrical equipment?" The question caught me off guard. These are medical devices prescribed by his doctor. I did not know I needed permits for medical equipment. "Any electrical installation over a certain amperage requires permits and inspections," Corinne said, pulling out a small notebook. "I am also going to need to see your business license and contractor permits for that generator testing you have been doing." I brought her my paperwork, but I could see she was looking for problems rather than reviewing legitimate documents. She flipped through my contractor license, business registration, and insurance certificates with growing irritation. "Your home business permit does not specifically authorize generator testing," she said finally. "And some of this medical equipment appears to exceed residential electrical code limitations." My heart started racing. "Sheriff, my father needs this equipment to stay alive. His cardiologist and pulmonologist both recommended these specific machines." "That may be true," Corinne replied coldly, "but it does not change the fact that you are operating outside of proper permits and codes. I am going to have to shut down all electrical operations at this residence until you can provide proper documentation." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You cannot shut off power to life support equipment. He will die without these machines." Corinne walked to the main electrical panel and put her hand on the master switch. "The safety of this community comes first. If you had followed proper procedures, we would not be in this situation." "Please," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "Give me 24 hours to get the paperwork sorted out. Do not put my father's life at risk over permits." But Corinne had already made up her mind. She pulled the main breaker, and every machine in the house went silent. The oxygen concentrator stopped humming. The heart monitor went dark. The BiPAP machine that helped Dad breathe at night powered down with a mechanical sigh. Dad's eyes went wide with panic as he realized what had happened. He tried to sit up, gasping for air, reaching for the oxygen tube that was no longer providing anything. "The backup batteries will keep some equipment running for a few hours," I said quickly, trying to reassure him while my own panic rose. "I will fix this, Dad. I promise." Corinne was already walking toward the door. "You have 72 hours to provide proper permits and documentation. Until then, this electrical system remains shut down for safety violations." "You are going to kill him," I called after her, but she did not even turn around. As soon as the patrol cars left, I ran to check Dad's equipment. The backup batteries were working, but they would only last 4 to 6 hours maximum. After that, he would be without oxygen, without his heart monitor, without everything keeping him alive. I had never felt so helpless in my entire life. The first hour after Corinne left passed in a blur of frantic phone calls. Dad's oxygen saturation levels were already dropping as the backup batteries slowly drained. The heart monitor showed irregular rhythms that made my own chest tighten with fear. Every few minutes, medical alarms would beep, reminding me that time was running out. I called the electric company first, hoping they could restore power based on the medical emergency. The customer service representative was sympathetic, but explained that they could not override an official safety violation filed by law enforcement. Sheriff Walsh submitted a formal complaint claiming electrical hazards at your address, the woman explained. Our hands are tied until that gets resolved through proper channels. Next, I tried calling the county health department, thinking they might intervene for medical necessity. The office was closed, and their emergency line redirected me to a voicemail system that promised a return call within 24 hours. Dad did not have 24 hours. I even called Dad's cardiologist, Dr. Peterson, hoping he could provide some kind of medical override. He was shocked by what had happened and promised to call the sheriff's office immediately to explain the life-threatening nature of the situation. 20 minutes later, Dr. Peterson called back with defeat in his voice. I spoke with Sheriff Walsh personally. She told me that medical needs do not supersede safety codes and that you should have followed proper procedures from the beginning. By the third hour, Dad was struggling noticeably. His breathing had become labored, and his skin was taking on a grayish color that terrified me. The backup batteries were showing red warning lights. I had maybe 2 hours of power left, probably less. I tried reasoning with Karen one more time, calling the sheriff's office and asking to speak with her directly. The dispatcher put me through, and I could hear the smugness in Karen's voice even over the phone. Mr. Martinez, I told you the rules. Get proper permits and your power gets restored. It is that simple. My father is dying, I said, not caring how desperate I sounded. His oxygen levels are dropping and his heart is showing dangerous rhythms. Please, just give me until tomorrow morning to get the paperwork. Should have thought about that before you decided to ignore safety codes, Karen replied. Maybe this will teach you to follow proper procedures in the future. She hung up on me. I stood there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, feeling something break inside my chest. This woman was willing to let my father die over paperwork. She was using her badge and authority to commit what felt like murder, and she did not care. That was when I remembered the generator truck. 3 months earlier, I had worked on a major power restoration project after a storm knocked out electricity to half the county. The utility company had brought in massive industrial generators, including a 40-ton diesel unit that could power an entire neighborhood. The truck driver, Jimmy Rodriguez, had become a friend during the week-long project. He was a good man who understood the importance of reliable power, especially in emergency situations. I found Jimmy's number in my phone and called him, explaining the situation as quickly as possible. There was a long pause after I finished talking. That sheriff cut power to life support equipment, Jimmy asked, his voice filled with disbelief. She says it is about safety codes, but my father is going to die if I cannot get power restored in the next 2 hours. Another pause. Then Jimmy's voice, firm and determined. I can have that generator truck to your house in 90 minutes. We are going to save your dad, David. That sheriff picked the wrong fight with the wrong people. For the first time in hours, I felt a spark of hope. While waiting for Jimmy, I forced myself to think strategically instead of just panicking. If I was going to bring a 40-ton generator truck into a residential neighborhood, I needed to make sure every detail was legally bulletproof. Karen would be looking for any excuse to arrest me or shut down the operation, so I had to be smarter than she was. I spent the next hour researching emergency power restoration codes on my laptop while monitoring Dad's condition. His breathing was getting more labored, but he was hanging on. The backup batteries showed 40 minutes of power remaining, maybe less. Under state electrical codes, emergency power restoration for medical necessity was allowed with proper documentation and safety measures. I needed a licensed electrician to oversee the connection, proper grounding equipment, and notification to the electric company. Most importantly, I needed medical documentation proving the life-threatening emergency. Dr. Peterson faxed over a detailed medical statement explaining Dad's condition and the critical nature of his equipment. I printed multiple copies and attached them to my emergency power restoration application. Jimmy would bring a licensed electrician with him, and I had all the necessary grounding and safety equipment in my work truck. The hardest part was the waiting. Dad's oxygen levels continued dropping, and I could see him fighting for every breath. His lips were starting to turn blue, a sign that terrified me more than anything I had ever seen. I held his hand and tried to keep my voice calm. "Help is coming, Dad. Just hold on a little longer." He squeezed my hand weakly and tried to smile. "I am proud of you, David. You are a good son." Those words almost broke me completely. At 4:15, Corinne's patrol car drove slowly past our house. She was checking to see if I had given up, probably expecting to find me defeated and begging for mercy. Instead, I waved at her from the front window, which seemed to irritate her. She made a U-turn and parked across the street, clearly intending to watch for any violations. Perfect. I wanted her to see what was coming. At exactly 4:30, I heard the rumble of a massive diesel engine approaching from the south. The sound grew louder and deeper, the kind of mechanical thunder that makes windows rattle and dogs bark throughout the neighborhood. I watched Corinne's face change from boredom to alarm as she realized something big was heading our way. The generator truck turned onto our street like a mechanical giant. 40 tons of industrial power equipment mounted on an 18-wheeler chassis, with Jimmy Rodriguez grinning behind the wheel. Behind him, a second truck carried the licensed electrician and additional safety equipment. Neighbors began coming out of their houses to see what was happening. Mrs. Chen stepped onto her porch with wide eyes. The Johnson family gathered on their front lawn. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed to witness whatever was about to unfold. Corinne got out of her patrol car and started walking toward the trucks, but Jimmy was already backing the generator into position in my driveway. The electrician, a man named Carlos Mendez who I had worked with before, began unloading safety equipment and cable. I met Corinne halfway across my lawn, carrying a folder full of documentation. "Sheriff, I have all the proper permits and medical justification for emergency power restoration. Everything is being done according to state electrical codes." Corinne's face was flushed with anger. "You cannot bring industrial equipment into a residential neighborhood without proper zoning permits." "Actually, I can," I replied, handing her the documentation. "Emergency power restoration for medical life support is specifically allowed under State Code 402.7. The equipment is properly licensed, the electrician is certified, and I have medical documentation of the emergency." She flipped through the papers with growing frustration, looking for something to object to. But I had done my homework. Every form was filled out correctly, every signature was in place, and every legal requirement had been met. The generator truck's engine rumbled to life with a sound like controlled thunder. In the back of my mind, I could hear Dad's medical alarms getting more frequent and urgent. The backup batteries were almost dead. "This is harassment," Corinne said finally, her voice tight with rage. "No," I replied quietly. "This is a son trying to save his father's life." The 40-ton generator truck dominated my entire driveway and part of the street. Its massive diesel engine sat silent for the moment, but the sheer presence of the machine was intimidating. Industrial cables thick as my arm were coiled on the truck bed, and the generator housing itself was the size of a small building. Jimmy and Carlos worked with practiced efficiency, setting up grounding equipment and safety barriers. I had never been so grateful to see anything in my entire life. Corinne radioed for backup, and within 10 minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. 3 deputies joined her on my front lawn, all of them staring at the generator truck like it was some kind of alien spacecraft. The crowd of neighbors continued growing, with people walking over from adjacent streets to see what was happening. "This is a safety hazard," Corinne announced loudly, clearly playing to the audience. "Industrial equipment like this has no business in a residential neighborhood." Carlos Mendez, the electrician, looked up from his work and shook his head. "Ma'am, this generator is rated for residential emergency use. I have installed hundreds of these systems over the past 15 years. Everything we are doing is completely legal and safe." Jimmy climbed down from the truck cab and walked over to join the conversation. At 6'4" and weighing probably 250, he was an imposing figure who commanded respect just by standing there. "Sheriff, I understand your concerns, but we have a man dying in that house. His medical equipment needs power, and we are here to provide it safely and legally." Corinne's jaw tightened. "I do not care about your medical emergency. You are operating without proper permits." That was when I produced the final piece of documentation that I had been saving. "Actually, Sheriff, I filed an emergency power restoration permit with the county this morning. It was approved by the Emergency Services Coordinator 30 minutes ago." I handed her the signed permit, which I had received via email just before the trucks arrived. Corinne read it twice, her face growing redder with each sentence. The permit specifically authorized emergency power restoration for medical life support, citing the immediate danger to human life. "The permit is temporary," she said desperately. "You can only operate for 24 hours. "That is correct," I agreed. 24 hours to resolve the underlying permit issues that you created this morning." By now, at least 30 neighbors had gathered to watch the confrontation. I could see some of them whispering among themselves, clearly recognizing Corinne's behavior as unreasonable and cruel. Mrs. Chen was shaking her head in disgust. The Johnson family looked horrified that their sheriff was trying to prevent life-saving medical care. Carlos finished the electrical connections and gave Jimmy a thumbs up. The massive generator roared to life with a sound that vibrated through the ground and into everyone's bones. Industrial-grade electricity flowed through the thick cables into my house's electrical system. Inside, I could hear Dad's medical equipment powering up one by one. The oxygen concentrator resumed its steady humming. The heart monitor beeped back to life. The BiPAP machine began its rhythmic breathing assistance. After 6 hours of terrifying silence, the sounds of life support filled our home again. The crowd of neighbors actually applauded when they realized what had happened. Several people were wiping tears from their eyes. Mrs. Chen walked over and hugged me tightly. "Your father is a good man," she said in her accented English. "You did the right thing." Corinne was practically vibrating with rage. She keyed her radio and called for additional units, claiming a public disturbance and safety violation. But when the additional deputies arrived, they took one look at the crowd of supportive neighbors and the properly documented emergency operation, and I could see the confusion in their faces. One of the deputies, a younger man named Officer Martinez, approached me privately. "Sir, is it true that Sheriff Walsh cut power to your father's life support equipment?" "Yes," I replied. He has severe heart and lung conditions. Without his machines, he will die. Officer Martinez glanced back at Karen, then at the generator truck, then at the crowd of neighbors who were clearly on my side. And you have all the proper permits for this emergency power restoration. I handed him copies of all the documentation. He read through everything carefully, then nodded. Everything appears to be in order, sir. I hope your father recovers quickly. As he walked away, I realized that even some of Karen's own officers were beginning to question her judgment. The generator hummed steadily, pumping reliable electricity into our home. For the first time in 6 hours, I allowed myself to breathe. Karen's frustration had reached a boiling point. With the generator running legally and the crowd of neighbors clearly supporting me, she was rapidly losing control of the situation she had created. But instead of backing down gracefully, she doubled down on her authority in the most public way possible. David Martinez, you are under arrest for disturbing the peace and creating a public nuisance, she announced loudly, reaching for her handcuffs. The crowd of neighbors gasped. Several people started shouting objections. Mrs. Chen stepped forward and pointed her finger at Karen. You are the one disturbing peace, she said angrily. This man tries to save his father and you want to arrest him. Jimmy Rodriguez moved to stand beside me, his massive frame serving as a physical barrier between Karen and myself. Sheriff, on what grounds are you making this arrest? This man has broken no laws. He has created a public disturbance by bringing industrial equipment into a residential neighborhood without proper notification, Karen replied, but her voice lacked conviction. That was when Tom Johnson, my neighbor from across the street, spoke up. Tom was a retired insurance adjuster who had lived in Cedar Falls his entire life and commanded respect throughout the community. Karen, I have watched you operate for 2 years now, and I am sick of it, Tom said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. You cut power to a dying man's life support equipment over paperwork. You tried to prevent him from getting emergency medical care. Now you want to arrest him for saving his father's life. Other neighbors began sharing their own experiences with Karen's authority abuse. Maria Santos talked about receiving a citation for her garden, extending 2 inches over the property line. Bill Thompson described being threatened with arrest for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Mrs. Chen recounted being harassed for having a conversation with her neighbor that Karen deemed too loud. She came to my house 3 times last month, said Jennifer Walsh, a single mother with 2 young children. She claimed my kids were making too much noise playing in their own backyard during the day. She threatened to call child services if I could not keep them quiet. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone present. Karen had been systematically harassing residents over minor infractions, using her authority to intimidate and control people who had done nothing wrong. My situation was just the most extreme example of her abuse of power. A news van pulled up to the scene, drawn by reports of a massive generator truck and police standoff. Rebecca Torres, a reporter from Channel 7 News, got out with her cameraman and immediately began interviewing neighbors about what was happening. This sheriff cut off electricity to medical equipment that keeps an elderly man alive, Tom Johnson told the camera. When his son found a legal way to restore power and save his father's life, she tried to arrest him. This is not law enforcement. This is bullying. Karen realized the situation was spiraling completely out of her control. She grabbed the reporter's arm and tried to push the camera away. This is an active police investigation. You need to leave immediately. Rebecca Torres pulled away from Karen's grip. Sheriff, This appears to be a public street with a legal emergency power operation. Do you have any comment about cutting power to life support equipment? I was enforcing safety codes, Karen replied, but she sounded defensive rather than authoritative. Safety codes that required shutting off power to machines keeping a man alive, Rebecca asked. Karen did not have a good answer for that question. The crowd had grown to over 50 people by now, including residents from several blocks away who had heard about the confrontation. Many of them were elderly or had family members with medical conditions, and they understood exactly what Karen had tried to do. "What if it was your father?" called out an elderly man named Frank Rodriguez. "Would you let him die over permits?" "What if it was your husband's heart monitor?" asked Sarah Mitchell, whose own spouse had survived a heart attack the previous year. The questions kept coming, and Karen had no good answers. Her authority, which she had wielded like a weapon for 2 years, was crumbling in front of the entire community. The news camera captured every moment of her growing desperation and anger. Inside the house, Dad's medical equipment continued running smoothly, powered by the massive generator that represented everything Karen could not control: competence, community support, and the determination to protect innocent life. The confrontation had become about much more than permits and procedures. It was about the kind of community Cedar Falls wanted to be. The news interview changed everything. Rebecca Torres was an experienced investigative reporter who immediately recognized the bigger story behind the generator truck. While Karen tried to maintain control of the narrative, Rebecca systematically interviewed neighbors about their experiences with the sheriff's department. "In the past 6 months, I have documented over 30 citations issued by Sheriff Walsh for minor infractions that were previously handled with warnings or ignored entirely," Rebecca told her viewers during the live broadcast. Residents describe a pattern of harassment and intimidation tactics targeting elderly residents, single mothers, and anyone who questions her authority. The interview with Dad was particularly powerful. Rebecca and her cameraman entered our house to document the medical equipment that Karen had tried to shut down. Dad, though weak and breathing with difficulty, spoke clearly about what had happened. "I am 78 years old," he said, his voice raspy but determined. "I served in Vietnam, worked 45 years as a mechanic, raised 3 children, and buried my wife 5 years ago. I never thought I would see the day when an American police officer would try to kill me over paperwork." The image of a frail, elderly veteran connected to life support equipment, contrasted with Karen's aggressive behavior outside, created a stark visual that resonated with viewers across the region. But the real turning point came when Rebecca discovered that state regulatory officials were already investigating the sheriff's department. Apparently, multiple complaints had been filed with the state attorney general's office about civil rights violations and abuse of authority in Cedar Falls. At exactly 6:30 that evening, 2 black sedans pulled up to the scene. 4 officials from the State Regulatory Commission got out, along with an investigator from the Attorney General's office. They had been monitoring the news coverage and decided to intervene immediately. The lead investigator, a woman named Linda Patterson, approached Karen with official documentation. "Sheriff Walsh, we are here to investigate complaints about unauthorized shutoff of power to medical life support equipment. We need to speak with you immediately." Karen's face went pale. She tried to maintain her authoritative demeanor, but I could see panic creeping into her eyes. "This is a local law enforcement matter. The state has no jurisdiction here." "Actually, we do," Patterson replied calmly. Denying emergency medical care through abuse of governmental authority is a federal civil rights violation. We have multiple witnesses, video documentation, and medical records showing that you knowingly endangered a man's life. The crowd of neighbors watched in stunned silence as the investigation unfolded in real time. Karen was escorted to one of the black sedans for questioning, while other officials interviewed me, Jimmy, Carlos, and several neighbors about what had happened. Inside the house, I checked on Dad and found him sitting up slightly, breathing easier now that his equipment was running reliably. His color had improved significantly, and the heart monitor showed more stable rhythms. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better," he replied with a slight smile. "But more importantly, I am proud of what you did today. You stood up to a bully who thought her badge made her untouchable." Through the window, we could see the generator truck still humming steadily, surrounded by neighbors who were sharing their own stories with the state investigators. The community that Karen had tried to intimidate was finally finding its voice. Rebecca Torres concluded her live broadcast with a powerful summary. What started as one family's desperate attempt to save a father's life has exposed a pattern of authority abuse that may have affected dozens of residents in this small town. Tonight, a 40-ton generator truck represents more than emergency power. It represents what happens when a community refuses to accept injustice. The state investigators spent 3 hours documenting everything. They photographed the medical equipment, interviewed neighbors, reviewed all the permits and documentation, and examined Karen's pattern of citations and complaints over the past 2 years. By 9 o'clock, Karen was officially suspended from duty pending a full investigation. Her supervisor, Captain Reynolds from the county sheriff's office, arrived to take control of the situation and publicly apologized to me and Dad for what had happened. "This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of law enforcement in this county," Captain Reynolds said. "We will ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." The generator continued running through the night, powering Dad's medical equipment and serving as a symbol of what one person could accomplish when pushed too far by injustice. Neighbors brought us food, offered support, and shared their own stories of standing up to authority abuse. For the first time in 2 years, Cedar Falls felt like a real community again. The investigation moved quickly once state officials became involved. Within a week, Karen Walsh was facing multiple charges including civil rights violations, reckless endangerment, and abuse of authority under color of law. The federal civil rights charge alone carried a potential sentence of 10 years in prison. The story had gone viral on social media, with the image of the 40-ton generator truck becoming a symbol of resistance against government overreach. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and I received hundreds of messages of support from people who had faced similar situations with corrupt local officials. Dad's health improved significantly once his medical equipment was running reliably again. Dr. Peterson said the 6-hour period without proper life support had been extremely dangerous, but Dad's vital signs stabilized within 48 hours of power restoration. The stress and fear of the situation had been harder on him than the actual medical crisis. "Your father is tougher than he looks," Dr. Peterson told me during a follow-up appointment. "But what that sheriff did could have killed him. I have never seen such a blatant disregard for human life from a law enforcement officer." The community rallied around our family in ways I had never experienced. Neighbors organized a meal schedule to ensure Dad had proper nutrition during his recovery. Mrs. Chen appointed herself his daily wellness checker, stopping by every morning to make sure his equipment was functioning and his spirits were good. The Johnson family started a legal fund to help with any expenses related to the federal case, though it turned out we did not need it. 3 different civil rights attorneys contacted me offering to represent us pro bono, recognizing the case's importance as a precedent for government accountability. My electrical contracting business experienced an unexpected boom. The positive publicity from standing up to corruption attracted customers from throughout the region who wanted to support someone who had fought for what was right. I hired 2 additional employees and expanded into commercial generator installations. But the most satisfying outcome was the broader change in Cedar Falls. Karen's suspension and the ongoing investigation sent a clear message that authority abuse would not be tolerated. The new acting sheriff, Deputy Martinez, implemented community policing practices that focused on helping residents rather than harassing them. The state investigation revealed that Karen had issued over 200 citations in 2 years, compared to fewer than 50 issued by the previous sheriff in the same time period. Most of her citations targeted elderly residents, single mothers, minorities, and anyone who had ever questioned her authority. 6 months later, Karen Walsh was convicted on federal civil rights charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. She was also banned from ever holding law enforcement positions again. The judge's statement during sentencing was particularly powerful. Sheriff Walsh used her position of trust to terrorize the very people she was sworn to protect, the judge said. Her willingness to endanger an innocent man's life over petty bureaucratic disputes represents the worst kind of authority abuse. This sentence should serve as a warning to any public official who believes their badge places them above basic human decency. I used my experience to become an advocate for protecting vulnerable residents from government overreach. I spoke at town halls, wrote letters to legislators, and helped other families navigate situations involving corrupt officials. Dad often joined me at these events, becoming a powerful voice for elderly rights and medical access. The 40-ton generator truck, which had saved Dad's life and exposed Karen's corruption, returned to its regular utility work with Jimmy Rodriguez. But it had become legendary in our area, with people calling it the Justice Truck and requesting it specifically for emergency power restoration projects. Today, Dad is doing well. His medical equipment runs reliably on our properly permitted electrical system, and he has become something of a local celebrity for his role in exposing corruption. He spends his mornings reading news articles about government accountability and his afternoons advising neighbors who face problems with local officials. Sometimes, Dad told me recently, one person standing up to a bully can change everything for everyone. He was right. All it took was refusing to let injustice go unchallenged and having the courage to fight back when it mattered most.